Welcome everyone to this long-awaited initial meeting of the Community Safety Review Committee of the Brattleboro Select Board. I am one of your hosts, and by host I mean facilitator. My name is Shay Witzberger. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. And I'm just gonna start, before we do any more introductions of committee members or anything, do a tiny just orientation to the format, the Zoom, so folks know what we're expecting, especially non-committee member participants. And then we'll introduce ourselves and each other. Does that sound okay? Awesome. So this is the way that meetings are happening because of a pandemic. We're going to talk more about open meeting law and what our obligations are a little bit later in the meeting. But for everyone to know, this is a public meeting. It was warned to the town. It's going to be recorded. We're going to save a transcription. We're going to take minutes. So everything that you say here is very quotable. And for folks who are joining by phone, the way that we're going to take public comment when it's time for that is just going to be the raise hand function in Zoom. For those of you in a computer version or a phone version of Zoom, you can do that as a little button. For folks on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. Folks on the phone can mute and unmute themselves using *6. However, we're going to ask you not to do that yet. We've left the I think you all have the ability to do that yourselves. When it's time for public comment, we'll make sure that we're double checking folks who appear to be joining by phone to make sure we're not leaving out anyone's voices. But that's how that's going to happen. To start out this meeting, we do not have the chat function enabled. We wanted to check in with the committee about that decision before we made it. The way that we're going to take public comment primarily is going to be through the raise hand function. So we're not going to be monitoring the chat or taking comment through the chat. The chat is not accessible to people on the phone, and there are pros and cons, and we're pretty open about that, but we wanted to check in with you all first and make sure that we're keeping this as safe and streamlined as possible at the beginning, and then we can open it more up if that's what we all want to do. Is there anything I missed, Emily, in this little micro Zoom intro?
I just want to share that I will be taking notes through the meeting. So I'll be sort of doing that at the same time as participating and listening. I don't think that you did. If folks are joining on the phone, and we'll say this, I don't think at this moment we have any phone participants that I can see, but for phone participation, it's *9 for raising your hand and *6 for muting and unmuting. So yeah, and I think that's that.
All right, so our first agenda item is meeting each other. And I've done a little bit of my piece of that already. My hope is that this is the meeting where you will hear the most of Emily and my voices out of all the meetings, because this is going to be an orientation and grounding sort of focused meeting. And after that, I hope there's much less of me talking. But we're going to introduce ourselves now. What we would hope is that you can introduce yourself by your name, the pronouns that are accurate for you, any visual description you'd like to share of yourself, and any identities or rules that you're bringing to this that feel important. Any accessibility needs that you have that we could attempt to meet. Maybe your intention of joining the committee. That's a lot. We don't have a lot of time. So name, pronoun, anything you want to describe about yourself visually or about your identities that you're bringing to the committee, and accessibility needs while you're here. So I'm modeling. My name is Shay Witzberger. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I am a white person with a long braid and a woven necklace sitting in front of a window. I am facilitating this process with Emily Megas Russell. I was involved in bringing this process up and did not know that I would be facilitating it at that time, but I'm glad to be here with you all. And I do not have accessibility needs that are unmet at this moment. Emily, you want to go next?
Sure.
Great.
I am Emily Magnus Russell. I use she, her pronouns. I want to share that I am a somatic body-based psychotherapist. I'm a parent, a mother, and I baked cookies, but I'm really sad I can't share them with you all. If it was an in-person meeting, I would have brought them to the meeting. And I also, like Shay, have been involved in encouraging the town and supporting town in moving through this process, this community safety process, and also didn't know that I would also be then facilitating. That was a very last minute decision. But I am really excited for the process and trusting what is going to emerge. I want to say that if you have accessibility needs, you can either communicate them here, or you can email us directly if you'd rather do that. And of course, that's true of anything you'd like to share. And I think that's it. I check. And committee members are welcome to unmute yourselves and popcorn style introduce. And if you need a reminder, we're doing names, pronouns, any visual descriptions you'd like to share, any associations, identities, and roles that feel important to share, accessibility needs, and intentions for joining the committee.
I don't mind going next. I'm Kelsey Rice, she, her pronouns. I'm born and raised in Brattleboro. I moved to sort of outside outlier towns of Brattleboro when I started having kids, but Brattleboro's continued to be my base. I've worked in Brattleboro all these years and do all my life business in Brattleboro. So definitely born and raised resident of Brattleboro. Other important things to share, I've already shared, I'm a single mother, a survivor of domestic violence, and very clearly in my brief little interview there, I mean, I made it my point to say it's important to me that our voices are heard in this process, but I want all of you to know that although I couldn't attend all the select board meetings leading up to this due to the timing and kids, and it takes some pre-planning for me to do that, I did watch all of them when they were posted, and just blown away by the efforts put into this process, and super interested and dedicated to what we're all doing here for everyone. So I really wanted to say that. I'm honored to be here and so excited to work with all of you.
I can go next. Oh, I'm sorry. DA, is that, how do you say your name? I think you had your hand raised as well.
That's okay, you can go.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Lana DeVries. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as a Black woman, and I say that because I'm biracial. My father is white, my mother is Black, and I think it's important to acknowledge colorism, and that a lot of times lighter-skinned Black women are the ones with the voice. So I make it clear that I am a lighter-skinned Black woman. I have braids. I'm a mother, and so what brought me here? Even though I wasn't involved in this process from the beginning, I have been involved with the Defund movement, Defund 413, and several other efforts sort of alongside this particular meeting and leading up to this meeting. I'm a prison abolitionist, and I believe in fostering community and strengthening our ties, and that's why I'm here.
I'm Darlene Derby. I go by she, her. I am a mother. I'm a Mima of 14 grandbabies, soon to have another one, or two, I'm sorry. I'm here because I work a lot in the community. I am a recovering addict, and I'm helping people with their addiction. I'm a certified recovery coach, and I work with Turning Point, and I want to help make Brattleboro a better community for not just myself, but for other people and my grandkids. to live in. Thank you for having me.
I'm trying to find a good moment to go when I don't have kids talking in the background. My name's Laura Stannis, and I use she, her pronouns. And I identify as a mom and a queer mom and an educator. I spend a lot of time hanging out with teenagers. I'm a high school teacher. I am also a white person. I have like shortish brown hair and a nose piercing. I was not involved with the writing the RFP, but I did listen to the select board meetings and was super inspired by the work you're all doing already. And I am totally excited to be involved with this next chapter and work with you all.
Hi, my name is Annlise Griffin. I go by she, her. I am a mom also. There's a mercifully quiet moment that I don't entirely trust happening in my house right now. You're sure to see a small person come in here at some point this evening. I am on the board of the Community Justice Center and also volunteer there as a member of COSA, a Circle of Accountability and Support, and working with people who have recently been incarcerated and who are working to establish a new life outside of prison. And the work that I've seen happening there with partnerships between the town and the Community Justice Center and all sorts of other agencies have been just really amazing to me, the way that people with different philosophies and sort of bottom lines of how they believe the system should work or should even exist can work together in our town to make things, to move things forward and to help people. And so I'm really excited to be on this committee and continue that work.
I'm Bob Ozer, sometimes with an unstable internet connection, and hopefully you can hear me. So I am a white person. I've been in Brattleboro about a dozen years. When I first came here, I got involved with the Community Justice Center. I'm retired from New York State employment. I worked there in a county jail. I worked as a probation officer, a parole officer in an institution for the state of New York, and a field caseload, and was an employee relations officer in that agency. So I put all that in a resume to the board so you know what conflicts or what background I might have. Currently, I'm a Justice of the Peace in town, and as I said at the select board meeting, I think this is very important work of this committee, and so that's my reason for getting involved in it. Most recently, I was also involved with a group that Emily helped foster, which was the Core Experts Group, later Collaborative Neighbors, that tried to get insights from folks with lived experience. That's sort of an ongoing project. There's a lot more to say, but I'll stop there.
Hi, my name is Maya Shulman. I identify as, well, I go by she, her pronouns. I identify as a white woman and Jewish as well. I work at HCRS as a clinician. I work with children and their families. I also am a psychotherapist. And let's see, I mean, I think that my connection to the mental health field and my experience in that field in this town is what brought me to this committee. I also worked at the Brattleboro retreat previously. I honestly applied to join this committee because one of my friends told me I should, and I wasn't closely following this whole process, but I'm very interested to get involved, and personally have the philosophy that social work has to happen on multiple levels simultaneously in order to be effective. So I'm happy to have this opportunity to do like a more systems macro project.
I can go next if no one else is. My name's Casimir DeWolf, Cas for short. I am, sorry, my pronouns are they, them, or he, him. I'm a white, scruffy guy currently wearing a gray t-shirt and a black bandana, and black glasses, black plastic glasses. I'm trans and queer and psychiatrically disabled, with lived experience of forced psychiatric hospitalization and treatment. Well, I guess forced hospitalization, coerced treatment, if treatment is medication. But I also use medication voluntarily. I'm going on to saying way too many things here. I'm a prison abolitionist and abolitionist of forced forced hospitalization and forced treatment, and forced institutionalization. I'm also a disability justice activist. Forced institutionalization in general, which there's many forms of. And I also have lived experience of homelessness and substance use. I sometimes have some speech barriers, and text or the chat function. I would really appreciate that accommodation, though I do know that it's not accessible to people on the phone. But there's today in particular, I'm actually really struggling with speaking, so that I would like that accommodation if possible. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Emily, would you rather go, could we actually make a committee decision, our very first committee decision, and talk about the chat for just a moment? In my plan, I had talking about how we would make decisions before making decisions, but I think because there's an accommodation on the table that I would like to meet, maybe we could do one, and then we'll talk about how we make decisions after that, if that's acceptable to you all. So the chat, we wanted to check in with you all about the chat, because that opens the chat up. I think the only option is basically for everyone. That includes all the people who are not in the committee as well. We are not going to be able to fully monitor that space and facilitate at the same time. We do not have control over what people type. We want to keep this a safe place for you all. We want to make sure that we are building up a culture and agreements that are not tolerant of bigotry of any kind, of hate of any kind. And also we want to acknowledge that the chat is not a space where everyone in the meeting is able to make public comment the same way that they would while raising their hands. So I think because it's an accommodation that's very helpful for a committee member and probably other people as well, it makes sense to me for us to open it up with those qualifications, right? Does anyone have any concern about that? If not, I think we could do a little vote. Yeah.
Can I, if we do that, is there someone who's able to maybe read the chats or at least read what Kaz has to say so that everyone has an ability to hear it? And then is there a way to block people on the chat if they are being, you know, not not community oriented? I don't know how to say that. Nice way to say.
So I'd just like to tell you all what the chat options are so that we can get clear about what our options are. So the options are: participants can chat with no one, which is what we have active right now; host only, which would be actually to Shay and I, because we're the co-hosts of this; everyone publicly and privately, which means that you could send a chat to everyone or send a chat directly to another person in the meeting. So participants can chat with no one, host only, everyone publicly and privately. And I appreciate your idea, Lana, and I thought of that as well. I think we can try it. I think that in future meetings, we're going to be sharing the roles of meeting facilitation among committee members, roles like note taker and timekeeper. For this meeting, Shay and I are going to fulfill those roles so that we can just focus on meeting each other and grounding and connecting. And so as long as y'all are okay with me saying, can we pause for a moment and slowing things down a little bit to be able to read the chat, or to see how that feels, to see how that goes, then that's fine with me.
And I think we will have to shut the chat off if it becomes a space that is hateful or that is being used in a way that is harmful in some way. And we're going to really encourage all participants to make comment by raising your hands, which Kelsey is doing right now. So I perhaps should call on her.
I was just going to say, I wonder, once we move into sort of sharing roles, if maybe Kaz or any other committee member that's needing to or wanting to lean on that accommodation, maybe just raise their hand and alert us that that whoever we've designated to keep an eye on the chat could keep an eye, and then so we wouldn't maybe always have someone focused on the chat, but if we needed to, like if there was a specific reason a committee member, we could have a point person keeping an eye on it. Might be an idea.
Great. And I don't know that needs to be the person who needs it as an accommodation. That can be any one of us that we're going to just share the roles, and we'll name those at the beginning of each meeting.
Right. Right.
And we will be monitoring it for now when it opens, because we are tasked with holding this space. And we can't control it, but we can monitor it, and we can do our best to address what happens there. That's what we have responsibility and ability to do. Not control, but, engagement. So we could do this in a less formal way. If there's any dissent present, I think we need a formal vote. But if there's no dissent present, we could do a less formal vote to open up the chat for everyone chatting publicly. How do folks feel about everyone chatting publicly being open on a trial basis? You can raise your emoji hand or your actual hand, I think.
Darlene, do you have something to say? No, you're saying, okay.
Great. Awesome.
Okay, I am going to open the chat, and I'm going to open it to everyone publicly or everyone publicly and privately. Does anyone have any opinions on that?
I had suggested everyone publicly for now, but if anyone has a reason to privately as well, that's acceptable to me.
Okay, since y'all just thumbs up everyone publicly, we'll do everyone publicly. Okay. And I do appreciate your idea, Kelsey, I think. If anybody does decide to use I know I appreciate your idea, but I think that if you decide to use the chat for content that you would like shared in the meeting, effectively, if you need somebody else to read or speak for the content, which I'm totally happy to do, and somehow it gets missed, that doesn't happen pretty soon after you write the content in, please go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll peek over at the chat, simultaneous with addressing the raise hand.
Raise your Zoom hand.
Yeah, Zoom hand.
You can also raise your regular hand, but we're going to be paying attention to your little blue Zoom hand, which is a very bizarre.
Does everyone see the raise hand button on the Zoom? And Kaz says, thank you. Good practice.
Thank you for asking.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, and before we go much further, I just want to acknowledge and thank Janet Dickinson and Christine, who is also here for their ASL interpretation. And so just draw folks' attention to that if it's a need for people, and also just sharing some gratitude for their presence. Great. So our next agenda item, I'm just going to double check to make sure there's no hands up.
And I also want to apologize for a couple of people I left in the waiting room for longer than I intended. Noted, not intentional. First time. Thank you for your patience.
Mm-hmm.
Tim. And anyone else. I don't know if Emily let other folks in too.
Darlene, do you see, I'm just going to make sure everyone can see the raised hand feature. If you click on if you hover over the screen on the bottom, there's a bar that comes up where your mute button is, where you can stop the video. And there's also a button that says participants. If you click on the participants button, is that where it is for y'all, the raise hand feature? Okay. If you click on, do you see it now? There's a little hand that looks like this that says raise hand. Okay, great. Alrighty. Any other needs or questions before we move on to the next agenda item?
Thank you all for spending this time with us on these early setup tasks. I think the content will get juicier as we continue, but in this meeting, we're gonna be doing a lot of orientation. Hopefully less tech orientation now and more process orientation.
So another thing I wanted to say is that we are going to do a 5-minute break right before, I think, right around the 7 o'clock hour. We're going to take a break. Please take care of your own needs and feel free to turn your camera off if at any point you need to. But we will be taking a group break at some point as well. Okay. So our next agenda item is to discuss open meeting law and to dialogue a little bit as a committee about the balancing needs and kind of the legal call to ensure that this process is transparent and open to the public. And the another call that I think in the larger process we have, which is to ensure that we are protecting information that relates to someone's experience of safety, danger, and harm as we move forward in our process together. So I know Peter Elwell is on this call, and thank you for being here, Peter. And he has expressed a willingness to be interrogated if we have questions about open meeting law, because Shay and I are on no level experts on this topic.
We've been interrogating him.
Yes, yeah.
He's been very helpful to us in understanding the constraints.
Yeah. And what I will say here, Peter, is that if we say something that is completely wrong or illegal, you are sort of blanket interrogated to please raise your hand and let us know. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we did send along to you all some attachments. Hopefully you got a chance to review them. If not, that's okay. If at some point you can review the open meeting law attachments, there are some great FAQs from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns that give us a sense of what our requirements are. And some basic ones that we've already sort of experienced are that we're required to have this process happen in public because of COVID-19. There are amendments. One of the FAQs, one of the attachments is the COVID-19 amendments, or that might not be the right word, but regulations. And because of COVID-19, there doesn't have to be a physical location for the meeting. So Zoomlandia becomes our meeting location, and we're going to continue to meet on Zoom for the entire process. We don't have any active plans to meet in person for this process. There are 9 committee members. We have 8 committee members here, but a quorum is a majority of the committee members, and it's not a majority of the committee members present, it's a majority of the seats. So we have 9 seats. So a quorum is 5. So if we have 5 members present, 5 or more members present, then we have a quorum, and we are subject to, where the body is subject to open meeting law. We are also required to allow public comment. And so what I want to say to the public who's joining us for this call is thank you for being here. And we appreciate your presence and also your respect for the committee's work in this time that we're gathering. And please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to comment or ask a question. And what we are going to plan to do for this meeting is we'll note the raise hand and make space for public comment as the committee dialogue wraps up around any particular agenda item. Okay.
Can I interject that?
Yep.
Luckily, meeting that we're not going to be doing very much decisional work in this meeting, so public comment is welcome in this meeting, but less, very important than if we were making some really big decisions. And we're going to be making space for that comment as we can in each sort of, especially in decisional agenda items, but also otherwise. Open meeting law only requires space for public comment to be offered ever once. But I think it is the standard practice of Brattleboro committees, and a good idea probably to allow more than that of participation from the people. Yeah.
One thing that I think it's important that we talk about is that a meeting is not just, well, it's not just an in-person meeting, and it's not just this, the Zoom meeting. It includes really any correspondence or discussion that happens on any platform where there's a quorum. So emails between the whole committee are essentially a violation of the open meeting law, unless the emails are specifically about administrative tasks like scheduling. So that's why when we sent the email to you all, we BCC'd everybody just to make sure that we didn't inadvertently violate the law, right? If we do, moving forward, decide we want to be able to do scheduling with everybody's names sort of visible as a committee, the big thing is that, so Shay, it's important to say, Shay and I are not committee members. We are contracted by the town to facilitate this process. So our work with each other is not subject to open meeting law. So we can send an email to you all as a committee, but the moment anybody replies all, that now becomes a violation of the open meeting law, because as a committee member, you're discussing with the group. Yeah. Discussion, and Peter, I'd like you to hear what I say, and if I say something wrong here, please let me know. My understanding is that discussion between committee members that is not a quorum, so 4 or less committee members, is not subject to open meeting law, but committee decisions cannot be made in those discussions. So I'm just going to ask Peter to, yes,
There he is.
raise your hand. Thank you. And I think you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a clarification there, I guess an elaboration that I think might be useful. So everything so far has been completely accurate. There's a nuance to this idea that a quorum can't have a conversation, which is that you also can't do that in a series of conversations in a way that would have been illegal in one conversation. So it's important to, as you do have interaction with one another in groups of 2 or 3, perhaps some subcommittee work of 4 of you at a time working together, it's going to be important that communications that go on in those settings don't get related to other members of the group in a way that would be suggesting a course of action, or really discussing substantively the matter in any way that would reflect what the other conversation contained. So as an individual, you can have interaction with any other member or a couple of members at a time in a way that's just helping you to sort of grapple with the issues that you'll be addressing. But you want to be really cautious not to have a series of conversations end up substantively getting to the same place as if 5 or more of you had gathered and had a cup of coffee and decided how you would actually act when you got into the public meeting.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. That's super helpful.
My understanding too is that a group becomes a sort of formal body if we as a committee empower that group to make decisions. So smaller groups are going to be able to gather information and discuss things together without a quorum, not relaying it to the rest of the group. But we're not going to be empowering, I think, that smaller group to be spending money or making large decisions about the process or anything. You can discuss things, and then decisions are going to come back to this space, which is transparent and public and open. And in this space, we will publicly make decisions together if there are actionable items. And because this is largely an information gathering process, I think it will be less difficult in this type of process than in some others to do that. If any of us individually or in very small groups are just gathering information and bringing that back, then that's, less decisional, hopefully. And so we're going to really keep those decision-making actions in this space. We're not going to be keeping those in those smaller spaces, I think, just to play it safe and keep it transparent and be working as a collective. We hope that this is a team. We've been calling it a team, not a committee, but it can be both. It's fine. That's semantics. But I like team.
Peter, anything you want to reflect back on that?
Thank you. Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Any questions so far from the committee? Oh, somebody's in the waiting room here. A lot to keep our eyes on here.
You all can, again, feel free to email us with specific questions. We can consult with Peter and the town lawyer if needed about more complicated matters, but we want to be keeping this above board and transparent and open. And, in those information gathering moments that we'll talk later about, maybe de-identifying information in ways that make that public decisional sharing safer. If there's anonymous testimony or things like that we're going to be gathering, which we can talk about when we overview the process a little bit more. Which segues us in, unless there are questions, to our next topic, which is a little bit of an overview of the whole shebang. So we sent out what we sent to the select board, which was, the approved proposal that they hired us to do in an email to you all. But I want to just go over a couple of parts of that now, because that's what we're doing. It's going to be helpful to just ground in that together and be clear about what our goals are together. Is that okay, Emily?
Yep.
You got anything else to say about open meetings? All right.
Not right now. No.
Thank you. So the document that we sent you all that was approved is fairly long. I think it's 17 or 18 pages long. No shade if you didn't get through the whole thing or if you skimmed. It will be helpful for you all to get some understanding of that eventually. And if you need support with that understanding, again, you can reach out to Emily and I, and we are happy to be supportive in that way. Some of the decisions about the work that we're doing together are already made because that is in that document. A lot of our kind of goals and the process are within that resource for us. And we're going to use that to ground over and over again in the work. And that's why it will be helpful for you all to either read that or check in with us about going over that together if you need that. It starts out with some lengthy bios. We really don't need to get into that right now. And some information about Emily and I and why we should be chosen to do this process. Really not going to cover any of that here. But it also talks about our facilitation strategy, which we both hold space in a lot of different contexts. I often work as a teacher and an artist and a facilitator and work through processes with communities about safety, particularly around sexual violence. Emily holds many different kinds of spaces as well. We also recognize that particularly as white people, we may have some gaps in the type of the depth and brilliance of facilitation of specific listening sessions with different communities, etc. So we built in a little space in our facilitation strategy to engage in a very limited way co-facilitators. We might get to make a choice about that as a committee later. We're not going to make those kind of decisions today. We might be able to bring somebody in for a helping to lead or leading a specific listening session or event to gather information from specific communities, particularly communities that Emily and I are not a part of. We're a part of many communities, but we want to make sure that, nothing about us without us, that the people who are experiencing things can lead things, and that those people are getting some compensation for the intensity of that labor. So there's going to be those decisions to make later. We're not going to do that right now. Today is just orienting to this process. But that's going to be in a really limited capacity, like for an event or like a very small part of the process. Emily and I will be facilitating the majority of this experience. The scope of the process is a section of the document. It says that there's going to be a facilitation team, but there's going to maybe be some co-facilitators brought in at some point. That there's you all, the committee, who are so happy to meet and so happy to have been selected, that will be doing this work mostly in open meetings and helping guide us and give feedback and do some of the labor and the legwork of gathering information, particularly. There's the whole community, hey everybody, out there, who we're gonna try to engage really broadly. We have a short timeline to do this work. One of the potential benefits of Emily and I leading this process is that we know a lot of people. We know a lot of people in movements for justice and liberation and change also. And our hope is that in knowing all those people, that we can bring a broad swath of the community in to give feedback about what their experiences of community safety have been, et cetera. And then we're going to be engaging with some collaborative organizations at some point in time. Again, not something we can fully dig into in this meeting, but lots and lots of people have actually reached out, or we have reached out to them and said that they'd be interested in helping the work, in supporting the work, or and just giving information about their piece of the sort of ecosystem of safety response and the ecosystem of harm and wellness that exists in our community. And that's going to be lots of nonprofits and social justice organizations and people who respond to crisis situations. And our hope is to engage all these kind of people to see what their perspective is. Where are the gaps? What roles does everyone hold? What shifts are going to be needed? We're going to have to be, and we're grateful to be, working with all kinds of organizations as well. So those are sort of the players, I think, in this project. And the goal of the project is going to be to basically make a big, beautiful report due in late December, which feels far and near to me. And that report will be about what we've learned. What are individual one-on-one people's experiences that are de-identified for safety as needed? What are like communal different spaces? What are people reporting about what they've experienced? What are the people who enact these systems of safety? Where are they at in this process? We're going to report. We're going to make a report. We'll get into the details of it. Again, I'm going to say that a lot of times today. We'll get into the details later. But that report, where our hope is that that's going to include a map, a visual map of the ecosystem. I'm going to use this word. It's a little, but the ecosystem of what these responses and resources and experiences look like. And it's going to include a more formal written report. And then we're going to make some recommendations. And this process originally came out of some people coming to the select board and saying, we want change to happen. And them saying, we don't want to make any changes to the budget because it would defund everything across the budget. And because we're not all in agreement, we don't all know this is very much paraphrasing. But there was a process where people had many different ideas and came together. And it was not a moment where folks could come together enough to agree on any change because it might cause the roads to be unfunded and people had a lot of different perspectives. So we're going to be making a few recommendations at the end of this process. It says in this document that committee roles, that's you all, will be gaining understanding of the legal structures and the town, how to do this work in a town process, which is a different space than many of us do work. There's different formalities in how to do this work in this space. Gain understanding about agreements with each other, how to ground this process in anti-racism, in an anti-racist framework, in an anti-oppression framework, and to establish agreements together about, responses and safety and accountability and responsibility and how we're going to work together. Refine project methodology for gathering public input on experiences with police, crisis response systems, emergency responders, and other community safety professionals. So we're going to have to get really specific about how we're gathering that information respectfully, responsibly, accurately, safely, reverently. That wasn't in the document. That's my editorializing. I don't think I slid reverence in here, but you all will provide accountability to us, hopefully, about the process. We're going to implement some gathering of information together, I hope. And we're going to document the process and make a report. We're going to do this through several meetings. Hopefully we can agree today on a maybe regular meeting time. That's one of the committee requirements. The meetings should be regularly scheduled, special meetings or emergency meetings. There's different rules for each. We're hoping to get a regular meeting schedule out of today, approximately, hopefully. And we may engage in public forums if we all choose that that's a way to gather information. We may do some specific listening sessions. We may do one-on-one interviews, and we have agreed to do some form of anonymous testimony gathering, which will probably be primarily an online tool, is my guess, but we will be deciding that together. And then the other piece of this is that there's going to be a systems review of the Brattleboro Police Department and related workers. And that is going to be mostly led by Emily, who does that type of work in the world with other organizations in our community. It's like a quality review. It will not be an individual review of any person, but it's about the policies, practices, procedures, relationships, the flow chart of response. What is the police department in detail actually doing, and how's it working? And those things, all the information from the community and all the information about the police department will come together in this report and recommendations. In our document, we have metrics of success, which we don't need to get into here, but are available on the town website, I believe, for folks to look at. They largely center around how collaborative and safe this feels to people and whether or not we deliver this report at the end. And there are some tools, metrics for how we're going to be tracking things like accessibility, interpretation, childcare being offered, and how folks feel about doing the work together. We name some potential participants, which are largely those collaborative organizations we spoke of before. I believe there will be more organizations than just the ones we reached out to before we wrote the proposal that we'll work with, but there's a few listed there that we imagined working with. There are some risks listed about what are risks of doing this work and how we might manage them. And then there's a schedule and a budget. The schedule is a little bit ambitious, I will say, I think. And we're ready for it. And we will hopefully help ready you all for that ambitious work as well. I think that's the overview. That's a very gleaned, synopsized overview. And I would encourage anyone to, instead of quote me about those things, to look at the actual language of it if you want to read more. And we can get that to anybody who needs that proposal. That's going to guide our work. Those are the goals of this process. It came out of a acknowledgement of the moment that we're in as a country, some specific desires of many different people, different specific desires of many people to make change locally. And that is the proposal that was approved for us to facilitate. So you all are going to have roles in many parts of that. We might have some working groups that are not decisional, but information gathering that might help Emily with the systems review piece, or help gather information from organizations or individuals for the sort of community engagement piece. And we don't need to decide about who's going to do what tasks today, I don't think. We're going to give you very little homework, except for maybe steeping in those documents we already sent you for this meeting. But I imagine that there's going to be some out of committee work that is going to get done to gather information as this process moves forward. Emily, anything to add before we get questions?
Thank you, Shay. That was a very comprehensive overview, and I very much appreciate your perspective and your sharing. And I also want to welcome Drift to the meeting, although, oh, there you are. Found you in all the squares. Yes. Hi, Drift. Welcome.
Sorry, I was having internet issues. I'm so sorry.
Understood. We've all been there. So Drift is our 9th committee member. So we now have our 9 committee members here. Welcome, Drift. We are about an hour into the meeting, so I'll just share what we have gone through. We started with introductions. We started with a discussion of the overview of the use of Zoom for this style meeting. We also talked about open meeting law. I do encourage you to watch the first hour of the meeting if possible. We're recording it. That's important for you to know too, that this meeting is being recorded. We came to the decision. I'm sorry? Yes.
It's open to the public. There are many, many people here.
Yeah, it's open to the public as well. We made a decision to enable the chat function because an accommodation request was made for folks for whom writing is a more accessible way to communicate. And so we agreed that you're welcome to use the chat. I will keep my eye on it, and one of the facilitators will will speak what's written in the chat out loud for somebody if that's what's needed. And if in fact we miss it, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll peek at the chat to see if that has been discussed, or if that's a need. And Shay just gave an overview of the proposal and a little bit of information about this process, how this process has unfolded. So before we move on, I'd love to hear from the committee and to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your responses, your questions. Maybe before we do that, we can give Drift a moment to land and maybe to introduce themselves. Drift, are you available to do that right now, or do you want to wait and do that after the break?
Yeah, hi, I'm Drift, and I'm a social worker at the retreat. I'm sorry I was late, and I'm gonna catch up on the hour I missed. I'm really excited to continue on in the meeting. I don't know if anybody else wants to know other things.
What we asked folks to share at the beginning was just their name, the pronouns that are accurate for them, what identities or affiliations you would like to share about what brings you here or intentions for joining, and accessibility, any accessibility needs that you have for the meeting.
Yeah, I use they, them pronouns. I identify as queer, trans, non-binary, have white privilege. I don't have any accessibility issues at this time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Drift. Thanks for joining us. Great. This is so interesting, taking notes and being with you all. Thanks for your patience with me. So yeah, before we break, I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, you know, for those who maybe were able to read through the proposal. This is a great opportunity to get clarity and to discuss anything that might be present for you.
I guess I'm wondering how this committee can hold both priorities at the same time of like not breaking the open meeting laws, but also not requiring every single person to be on the record that we speak to. I guess a subcommittee, but I don't know.
Yeah, subcommittee or individual work. I think individual information gathering, I think, is allowable as long as it doesn't lead us to make any decision. So our hope is that perhaps we will make decisions about how we're going to gather information and, you know, what ways we're going to solicit information, things like that in this committee, because that's kind of a decision about the process. You know, what are the questions for this online tool going to look like? What are the questions that we might ask people? What forums might we hold, or what spaces might we outreach to? Our hope is that Emily and I just want to say that I have a lot of space for holding conversations like that. I've worked with as a domestic and sexual violence crisis worker in the past and feel very able to sort of hold things really safely. And so I can do some of that work. And I think that we will be in communication. We'll be extra transparent and clear with Peter and the town about what's allowable. And we're going to be doing some information gathering on our own or in very small groups. And we'll bring the aggregate information back to this larger group for decision making. And what that process looks like, we're going to keep deepening our understanding, and we're going to keep growing, and we're going to keep asking for information. But we're going to bring the message, and maybe not every single name of who who doesn't want to be brought into the public meeting. We can bring data into the meeting. And we're going to make sure that we are making decisions about how we're collecting data together, because that's a really important part of the process. And the public will get to weigh in and have some commentary about that, those decisions about the how. The what we provide in this space and in the report, we hope can be safely de-identified, which there are ways to do before, outing anyone's specific information that might put them in harm's way from people who have abusers or systems that they feel afraid of retribution from. So we can get into the specifics of that in the meetings in the schedule when we're going to be focusing on that. But that's our hope. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Shay. I'll just add to that, and Kelsey also has her hand raised. I'll just add to that effectively the transparency need will be met by the decisions getting made here, and then the committee will gather the information which the public who's interested will know is happening because of the transparency that's achieved in this meeting, right? So the content of the information that's gathered will then also be shared with the town, and I imagine the public, but through a process that everyone will be aware of, because we'll have decided those things in this meeting. Yeah. Kelsey?
Yeah, I have two questions. And one, maybe you haven't sorted out yet, but I'm just wondering about thoughts around how we're going to get sort of the word out and accessibility for folks in our community that don't necessarily have access to Wi-Fi, or at least reliable. And then even if they can get connected to free Wi-Fi, maybe, need some support around completing an online, process. So I'm just sort of wondering what work we're going to do in the community to make sure that this anonymous tool is accessible to people that need it. And maybe that's something we're going to figure out. So that's my first question. The second one, I know you haven't, I've definitely spent a lot of time reading this. And so I'm wondering about, I know we're encouraged and invited to give testimony publicly, which I definitely am planning to do. And I'm wondering when in the timeline would that be appropriate for committee members to do that, to have some planning around that. I wonder about when we do it, maybe it will help ease fears for some folks that at least have the ability to access what we do in these meetings. I know a lot of people don't, but if they see that we're willing to be vulnerable and testify, that can help. So I'm just wondering if you figured out in the timeline when we might do that.
Great questions. I can share about the accessibility piece. I think that our commitment to accessibility is firm, and our practices to increase accessibility are growing. So far, we are, these meetings are public. I think that we're going to move toward making them as open as possible in all the ways that they can be possible. Most of those are on the internet. Also, I think my hope, though it can't be a decision, is that some of these collaborative organizations that we might engage with will, it seems like a lot of people are invested in this work. And I think my hope is that those folks in organizations that support different communities of people within our community might help us do some outreach. We can put flyers up in town about once we have sort of an online tool developed, or a public forum set, or a listening session that we're going to host. We're going to be doing outreach in as many ways as possible, through social media, through organizations that are wanting to collaborate, through personally reaching out to people that we know in the community, all of us who might want to share, and in ways that we have not yet invented that you will help us invent, hopefully, because we don't know it all. That's the whole point. I think one of my favorite quotes is from Miriam Kaba, and she says, everything worth doing is worth doing together, or something very similar. And that's a grounding principle of this work for me. We can't do this alone, any of us. So let's co-invent it. And as for the other piece,
and I just want to add,
go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add to what you're saying too, Shay, which is that I really encourage us to be creative. And one of the things that I want to make sure we bring to this process, it was really brought to the RFP process. It's in our proposal. It's something I'm personally very committed to, professionally, I should say, very committed to, and personally, which is to engage the body and to engage creative and expressive strategies to support people in sharing their stories, right? And I think if we look at like, you know, maybe a public forum, to get to your second question too, Kelsey, I think if we were to hold a public forum of some kind that was essentially a committee meeting, right? But that it was specifically, the agenda was for folks to share their experiences of safety, danger, and harm in Brattleboro. I think that would be a beautiful way to, just as you're saying, engage people and lead the way and sort of show, sort of model that, you know, and to have a public gathering, right? It could be kind of like, you know, like an open mic style or something where we actually bring in creative space and creative sharing. You know, people don't have to sort of just stand there and, you know, speak their story. There may be other ways that that folks want to share, right? And other parts of themselves that they want to activate in their sharing. And we also can get creative about including expressive art in the proposal, right? We want to be careful. I mean, in the report, we want to be careful not to necessarily interpret someone's expression for them. But I can imagine and have seen reviews and reports that include artwork. This is actually a common tool that's used when working with children and gathering information with young people. And, you know, a huge, you know, and very valuable and important, you know, I should say, a valuable and important part of our community that may be nonverbal for any number of reasons, you know, and making sure that we think creatively, diversely, broadly about how we access information, right? So it's kind of like there's the issue of how do we attune to safety and make sure that there's a range of spaces where if someone feels safe enough to share publicly, that there's also a range of styles of sharing. And we're going to capture this as one of our measures of success is what's the diversity of styles of sharing, which includes creative and expressive and somatic styles of sharing. And also what is the range of access that people had to the spaces, right? And we're going to not only make sure that we're providing access, attunement to safety, and diversity of expression, but we're actually going to capture data on how that goes as a measure of success. So yeah, I think public forums being, you know, something that I think the committee could absolutely be leaders in as a public space, you know, in this committee meeting, and then all the way to anonymous testimony, right? And somewhere in between, there's opportunity for us to engage co-facilitators that have trusting relationships with communities who have been heavily impacted by harm and danger from community safety systems, right? And that information can happen outside of the public process because facilitators are not committee members, right? So their work is not subject to open meeting law. And that information can be shared with us, given to us, already de-identified. So we don't get any access, including Shay and I, don't get any access to the identities of those who shared. Does that make sense? So there's a lot for us to attune to in that, but I love your question and I love, you know, your offering ultimately.
We also have some things
I just,
go ahead. Go ahead.
That really does help. And I know we're going to sort of formalize these pieces as we go. But I guess like my personal ask is there a rough like schedule idea timeline of when it would be the appropriate time to share, even if it's in one of these committee meetings, right? Like just sort of that, I guess I'm wondering about that. Like I'm looking at our broad schedule. Do we have a rough idea of when we might be doing that?
Yeah, so I'll direct you to the schedule, page 12 and 13 of the proposal, if you have it in front of you. You know, I want to be clear that the schedule we intentionally made fairly flexible and broad because we wanted to make sure the committee had the opportunity to make, you know, was empowered to make these specific, very like specific decisions about when. But essentially this first week of September is really about orientation and connecting with an information gathering around open meeting law and legal matters, as you can see. October is really more oriented towards designing the information gathering structures that we're going to use. And then end of October and November is really when the information gathering content, like meetings or sessions, we're calling the header is information gathering sessions, and then the different styles like public forums, you know, one-on-one meetings, those things are all under the listening sessions header, right? So, or I'm sorry, are all under the information gathering sessions header, of which listening sessions might be one type of. So to answer your question very directly, Kelsey, it seems like if we're following our schedule, mid or end of October and November really is going to be when we've designed the questions, we're clear about who we're collaborating with, we're clear about who's doing what, and then we're going out metaphorically, mostly staying home and gathering the information or sharing our information. Is that more clear? Great. Thank you for asking the clarifying question.
I also want to say that I didn't mention before that we have written into our budget childcare. You know, there was some talk about whether or not that was relevant in a stay-at-home meeting setting, but as so many of us can see right now, if childcare is a barrier for someone to participate and share their story, we're going to attempt to give that person a small amount of childcare money that they can spend how they want, how is safest for their COVID bubble, pod, whatever, so that they can share that story. And my particular interest in that was also in allowing survivors of violence to be able to share explicitly about what they've experienced without fear that that would be sort of developmentally harmful for their children. It is not safe for children to be exposed to some of the things that happen in the adult world. And also for some people, they just cannot show up to things if there's not somebody who can help their child be engaged. And if that's a barrier to anyone, we can help support that. Another accessibility tool around tech is that if somebody doesn't have access to tech, we have a small amount of money in our budget to help support people to have access to enough technology to get their voice in this process. My imagination is that that might look like a prepaid phone card or a prepaid phone, or, you know, some way that we can give somebody just enough technology that they can share their experience with us. And those are not huge line items, but they're there to increase that very concern that there are a million reasons that participating in public processes are inaccessible. I think the group that formed this process was very thoughtful and aware of that, and that we're going to try to honor that depth of accessibility as much as we're able to. Having said that, we are significantly behind schedule.
I'm going to give Lana has her hand up, so I'd like to give her a chance to share. Yeah, please.
I can take my question after the break. So
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, let's, and I'm just going to add in there language interpreters too. So we have money for language interpreters as well. Great. So let's take a 5-minute break. So that means we will be back at 7:22. You're welcome to check my math, but I think it's right. Great. Okay. And yeah, take care of yourself, and we'll just take a short break and be back. Thank you. All righty, welcome back, folks. I'd love to go to Lana and then continue committee discussion on this, and then take some public comment if there is any about this piece, the proposal and the schedule and where we're at. And then we can move on to the agenda. So Lana.
So my question is about the end of this process. And to backtrack, the reason I have this question is because when we're asking the public to trust us with this information, I feel that we have to be able to tell them there's a reason for this. It's not just lip service. So what is so it's a two-part question, I suppose. What is the select board required to do with this information? That's one question. And then the other question is police involvement. What is the police department, if anything, required to do? And are they a part of this process? I mean, I see that that's in the schedule, that we'll involve them at some point. How are those talks going? Yeah, you got my question there. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this. Thank you so much, Lana. This is such an important question. I just really appreciate you bringing this up. And I agree with you that in order for us to be asking anything, to be asking any questions or for any information, there needs to be trust, or at least a commitment, right, to using that information. I'm going to answer your second question first, and then your first question second, if that's okay with you. So your second question was about police involvement, and we, as is clear in the proposal, and as Heshe has already mentioned, the way that we wrote it in the proposals, there's essentially a parallel process, right? Our final report will include the aggregate and reported out data, which essentially this committee will determine the how that happens, of the community experiences, right? The diverse information that we are able to receive and share as part of the community's experience with safety, danger, and harm in Brattleboro. The other arm of this proposal is a quality review of the Brattleboro Police Department. And that will include as comprehensive of a review that is possible in 2 months, or 3 months really, of the policies, procedures, and practices of the department. And as somebody who does quality reviews a fair amount, that is actually quite an emergent process. Often information is gathered, it's reviewed, and then there's questions, and there's gaps, and there's, sort of tracing that happens, tracing the information. Well, what would you do in this situation? How would you respond to this situation, right? So we have scheduled a meeting with we are in the process, I should say, of scheduling the meeting with the police chief and the town manager. So that's something that Shay and I will do. And that will be to help the police understand what this process is going to look like for them. I want to be really clear to everybody that this is not a performance review of any police officer and won't include a performance review of any police officer. This is a systems review, right? And it's heavily focused on the police in some ways because the police are charged with community safety imperative, and also are armed, and so have a high potential to cause some danger and harm, right? And so, and we will also be reviewing other carceral or community safety responses that have the potential to cause harm and safety, such as the crisis responses, the other crisis responses, including the mental health crisis response system. That will also include in our proposal, our plan, this has not yet been discussed with the police chief, but will. Our plan is to also hold listening sessions with the police officers to understand their experiences and gather information about their experiences as well. As far as I am aware, there has been no resistance that I'm aware of to this process happening. The police chief is aware it's happening and is amenable to these meetings, this meeting, and that is moving forward. We don't know, of course, exactly what that will look like until that arm of the process kind of gets moving. Do you have any clarifying questions about the police side of things? Yeah.
No, just moving on to the,
okay.
The select board. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful question. My sense, and Shay, I'd love you to fill in the gaps on this, is that our report, we are hired by the town, right, in the selection of the proposal to perform this review and to create a report that includes a series of recommendations, right? So this committee's job isn't just to decide how we're going to gather information and then go ahead and gather it. It's also to distill that information into recommendations, right? And part of the reason why the timeline is as it is with the December 31st date is so that this happens concurrent with the development of the next year's budget. Right. So it's not, I'm not aware that, to your question of like, what is their imperative, right? Like they will be receiving a report with recommendations from us. And my sense is that we will, as a community, continue to observe and engage in the process to ensure that those recommendations are heavily considered. Right. And because select board meetings are public and because the process of the budget development is transparent, there will be ample opportunities for folks to follow along and observe and encourage and support the select board in integrating the recommendations. Right. But as far as our imperative is at this time, it's to provide recommendations based on the information that we find, that we receive. Yeah. And one way that's been helpful for me to think about it is, right, like this isn't the beginning of the process and it's not the end of the process, right? It's an important piece of work. It's a big piece of work, but it's in the context of a long-term question that I think many communities in this country and in many countries are asking, which is, what are effective ways for communities to respond to the safety needs of its citizens, right, of its residents, right? And as a community, we're asking that question, and we're doing this piece of work to gather that information.
I want to add something, if I may, to the point about the police. We've also sent along to them a list of types of information that we're going to want from them. And we can talk more about that in Emily and my meeting with the chief and maybe the captain and Peter. What types of documentation do we want from them that we're going to evaluate is been sent to them. To the second point, I think that this process happened due to a fine dance between pressure and collaboration. That's what I would say. And my deep hope is that the select board will not be wasting resources, time, and money from all these people in empowering us to do this work and then not listening to what we come up with. That's my hope. And I hope that that's part of the collaboration part of that dance. And there's also a pressure part of that dance. And I don't know what roles each of us are going to have in the next phase of essentially what is this long arc of work. This phase is the information gathering, and I think it's a very valid question for us to hold and really be very strategic about and thoughtful about when we're asking people from impacted communities to share. If it's not going to go anywhere, I don't want to do that. That's not something I'm interested in personally. And is there space then for us to, really name to them in this report? Like, we put some resources and some time and lots of newspaper headlines and money and whatever toward listening to especially impacted community members, but the whole community. That was something they really, really wanted to make sure that it wasn't just the most impacted people. It was every people. And we're going to make space for the most impacted people to be centered and to listen to everybody. And if they can hold what we come up with as recommendations and use that toward the budget, that's my understanding of what this is all about. That my hope would be that that's a collaborative process. I don't know what their like legal obligation is to do that, but I think they engaged with this process because many people came to meetings who had some things to say about this process needing to happen. So I think I don't know about their obligation, but I know about community power. And my hope is that we can be constantly holding all people at all levels of this process accountable, including Emily and I. We need to be held accountable too, to be doing this in the most ethical way. And I am open to that accountability. So I hope they are too. I hope we all can, anyone who sits in any seat of power can be sharing that power and being accountable to that power. And that we're trying to build that into the process the ways that we can. And I hope that the select board can also be doing that too. That's a hope, not an obligation.
Thanks.
We'll see. Thank you for the question.
Kelsey?
Just a quick thing. Can we get a copy of what you sent along as sort of what information you'll be requesting of the police department? Can we see what you put on there?
Yes. I will say that in the proposal itself, there is a list of there is a list on page 8 of the documents that are being reviewed. And this is the core list of items. Okay. The list that we sent is a little more specific to help guide like exactly what documents we need. And I can send that list out to the committee.
And I think it says like, and maybe more on the list. It's like, this is at least what we're starting with. And also if y'all have ideas to add to that, that's why we're doing this as a community of people.
I think we'll have ideas. I'll just say.
Yeah, great.
I love that. It includes like their policies, procedures, practices, rates of how they're achieving different things, what their stats are looking like around who is being impacted. It also, I hope, is going to include what are the sort of accountability mechanisms there. What ways do we have? I think, we have the CPCC, we know a little bit about that, but like, what are all the ways that we have as a community to address accountability in any kind of policing? That's the police department, that's like wellness checks, that's involuntary hospitalization. What are the accountability mechanisms that are happening if there is the ability for anybody in power to force somebody to do something? We want to make sure that we have very great feedback loops and accountability practices in place. And that, so that's going to be one of the aspects as well, I think.
Any other committee thoughts, questions, concerns, opinions?
I just have a quick question. Now, while we're doing this community, is it going to be like the core expert group, Emily? Are we going to get a stipend for doing this? And exactly how long do we have to work on the items that you want us to work on?
Great questions, Darlene. Yeah, thank you. So yes, the select board voted in their last meeting on the 22nd to offer $750 stipend. So each of you will be receiving $750 for your participation in this process. And that will be paid directly by the town. So I imagine you'll be receiving communication from the town about that. And Shay and I will also get clarity about exactly what that process will look like. Our proposal outlines 12 committee meetings. And one of the action items we would like to get to tonight is schedule a regular meeting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that agenda item in terms of what that looks like. I'm inclined to say that that's the, I'm curious about your thoughts on this, Shay. I'm inclined to say that that's like the base level of expectation, not that you necessarily have to attend every single committee meeting. There's of course reasons why folks might not be able to attend, but that attending those committee meetings where we will be then making decisions about how this process will unfold is the sort of basic expectation. And then there essentially will be the opportunity to participate in additional ways if and when that works for you. Does that answer your question, Darlene? Great.
And the timeline is going to be determined by us for each specific part of the process. The whole thing's going to be done by the end of December. And Emily named a little earlier that like the first part is going to be us kind of building the ship, building the plane that we're going to fly in or whatever. That was a terrible metaphor, but we're going to design the thing a little more specifically. And then we're going to do the thing. And then we're going to write about the thing. And the designing is going to be, what are the questions? Who are we engaging? How are we holding information safely? What are the tools? How, what communities must we listen to? And how do we get that clearly designing that piece? We have a lot of it written in the proposal, but we want to make sure that there's shared decision making around some of those very important decisions. And then do the work. Emily and I will be holding a lot of that work. Emily's going to be the captain of the police systems review team, and I'm going to be that project, and I'm going to be the captain of the community information gathering project, and we're going to share, but those are the two prongs, and then we're going to make it into something beautiful and effective, and that's all going to happen by December 31st. So help me, goodness.
Any more committee comments and or public comments at this time?
Ooh, opening it up. I will say I'm very excited to hear from folks. Also, we, are trying to wrap up by 8. We have a couple of decisions to make. So we are going to make some time for that. And also we got some other things to do as well. Both balanced.
Great. Gary Stroud, go for it. Are you there, Gary? Oh, here you come. Hi. We can't hear you, but we can see you. Or I can't hear you.
We can't hear you yet, Gary, but we can see your face and your awesome headphones. We don't yet have audio for you, Gary. I don't know if you want to throw something into the chat if you're able. Or check your audio settings, but we cannot hear your voice.
All right, it looks like Gary might be typing.
Yeah.
Great. Anybody?
Is there anyone else's? Oh, there we go.
Gary is wondering if you would consider an alternate for the committee. This came up at the, well, I don't know if it came up, but I know it was a question that others had as well. And I have no idea what the protocol is around that. And so that is a question we would have to ask, we'd have to learn more about in terms of what that looks like. I don't know if the committee has any opinions or thoughts on this. This is new territory for me.
The voting process for committee members was, I don't know if you all recall, a very fascinating study in voting structures. So I imagine they have a protocol, but I would love to hear from you all too. Lana.
I'm
Thank you.
always up for, especially members of the community who are of color, finding a way to have their voices be a part of this process. So
Absolutely.
if there's a way we can make Gary involved, I think that's great.
Totally.
Whether as an alternate or otherwise, even
Yeah.
if the alternate is not a possibility or whatever. I love that idea, Lana.
And Gary saying, it would be my pleasure. Thank you, Gary. I agree with Lana. I think engagement for folks who want to be engaged, and especially for people of color and folks from other impacted communities, is critical. It's paramount to the work we're doing. So is it okay with you if Shay and I do a little bit of inquiry and get back to you directly and to the committee around this? Great. Gary says absolutely. Thank you, Gary. And Kelsey.
We can bring that information to the next meeting unless, Gary, you reach out with some specific contact info, but we can bring that information to the next meeting.
Yeah. Great. Is it okay if we go to Bob and then Kelsey?
Yeah.
Thanks. Bob, go for it.
You may also figure whether an alternate counts for your quorum. So if you
Bob, we are having a hard time hearing you.
3-member group that's investigating a certain topic, and you add another member to, or an alternate or two to that group, does that disturb?
Bob, you sound like a beautiful, garbled, very slow-mo robot. And if you want to ask that
Can you
question.
hear me now?
Yeah, a little better. More humanoid, certainly.
Can you hear me now?
Now we lost it a little bit. Are you willing to write your, would an alternate count towards a quorum? Yeah, these are good questions. And just looking at the time, I'm thinking that that's a helpful reflection, Bob. I'm thinking that Shay and I can do a little bit of inquiry with the town and get a sense of what our options are, and then we can bring that information back to the next meeting. Yeah.
I also want to say that my hope about this process is that being a facilitator is not the only way to have a
Can you hear me now?
Not very well.
I put something in the chat, just whether the alternate.
Yeah.
We're
going to look into it.
And my hope is that being a facilitator is not the only way to have a strong voice in this process, and that being a committee member is also not the only way to have a strong voice in this process. So whatever we discover about that, my hope is that many people who have an investment in this issue can find ways to be participant in this process. We have to do it together. There's no other way. Kelsey, I see your hand.
Super fast. I definitely leave space for other hands. But I see you mentioned asking Brattleboro PD for documentation of staff oversight, development, and de-escalation trainings and that sort of thing. I'm just hoping we also ask for just their entire training curriculum for all areas. We may not have time to dissect every little piece, but I think we're going to want to look at, more than just those specific items. So.
Thank you, Kelsey. I did actually ask for all trainings and said including those trainings, but I did ask for all trainings that have been offered in the last 2 years, but I totally agree with you. Thank you. Great. Yeah, Lana.
And piggybacking on what Kelsey said, there is a committee that reads the complaints against the police officers, correct? And are we discussing anything with that committee or bringing them into the table?
That's a good question. We will be reviewing all of their notes and all of the police reports to the select board, as well as all the CPCC notes. meeting notes, and then we can decide how we want to engage individuals as part of that committee. You know, committee to committee communication, I don't know where that lands in the whole structure, but we can figure it out. I have faith in us.
Yeah, I feel like we owe them at least the respect of, you know, saying, we know you've been doing this work for a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah.
Great. Great. Wonderful. Gary is saying that he is on the CCPC committee vice chair. Is that a conflict? So that's good information, Gary. Thanks for sharing. And again, as we understand a little bit better, certainly not a conflict for your participation in the open meetings. And as we understand a little bit better what's possible in regards to alternates or other ways of engaging, we can know that information now that you shared it. So thank you. Great. Okay, so is it all right with folks? Does anyone have any burning desires or needs before we move on?
I think we should try to move on.
Okay, so one of the things that very often happens when we try to engage somatic grounding work in the body is that it gets easily kind of exiled off the agenda and pushed away when inevitably what's happening right now happens, where we are squeezed for time. So what I would like to do is just do a 1-minute grounding practice because, and if anybody is unmuted and is able to mute themselves, that would be helpful. There's a little bit of background noise. As we move through this work, I want to offer the opportunity for us to even try to stay kind of connected to our bodies and connected to ourselves and connected to the possibility of a sense of safety as we move through this process. That's not always accessible for everybody, and that's really normal. But something that we are going to want to bring in, and in the future meetings, we're going to actually start with a bit of a grounding practice. So what I'm going to ask you all to do is, if you'd like to, I recommend turning off your video for just a moment. I'm going to keep mine on, but I recommend that you turn yours off if you would like to. You can keep it on if you want. With our videos and our audio off, just take a moment to settle in to your chair and see if it's possible to use this brief amount of time just to find your breath. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no way that your breath is supposed to be right now. There's no better or worse. And with your attention turned inward to your breath, see if there's anything that you're needing in this moment that you can offer yourself with your attention. Maybe there is a shift you want to make in your quality of breath. Maybe you want to breathe a little bit slower or a little deeper. Maybe you just need to acknowledge your energy state or your emotional state. And if this practice doesn't feel safe to do, don't do it. There's no need. We're just going to take 3 more breaths here. And then releasing the practice as you're ready, and taking a moment, and then turning your video back on. Thank you. And there's a comment, Gary, that really helped me center my chi and be at peace with at one with all true clarity. Thank you, Emily. We should practice this at all meetings. Well, that's a good segue, Gary. Thank you, into the fact that we will practice this, some version of this at all meetings at the beginning of the meetings. Always optional. You don't have to do it. That's why what's nice about turning your video off is nobody can see you.
And I want to name that that was requested by the people who were organizing toward this process as a response, I think, partly to the ways that meetings go in public spaces. There's not often a lot of space for being in touch with what we feel or experience, and feelings are information and have a lot to do with what we're doing here. So whether you are into it personally or not is totally legit. I'm often not a meditator guy, but it was requested by, particularly, just credit where credit is due, by people who experience many public town meetings to be disconnected and try to bring some form of connection in. And we can accept feedback about what that connectedness might look like for you all, but that's where that came from. All right.
Okay.
Can we move into this next little moment about committee roles? It doesn't have to be long. And then the last piece that we're going to do, I'm going to actually pause and say, who is able to stay past 8 o'clock by maybe 10 minutes? Could I see a raise of hands, Zoom hands, or real hands about people who are able to stay a little long? Not everyone. That is fine. It means that we will be delaying one important piece of our conversation, I think, which is committee agreements. I do not have any interest in making committee agreements without the whole group here. No. And particularly if we're talking about what's going to help us all feel and be safe, and how we're going to hold this space. Let's, if it's okay with you all, table that until an early agenda item of the next meeting. And to close out this meeting, we can just talk about some logistics, which would be committee roles and scheduling. So we have just a couple more minutes. Our proposed committee role structure between Emily and I is that we will rotate those voluntarily, and that some folks can help us with at least timekeeping and note-taking, and that we may have other roles that come up, chat monitoring, whatever, as we learn what we need, and that if we're open to a very short discussion about it, but as a beginning structure, if we can take those on in a voluntary rotating basis, it might free up Emily, who's been doing all the note taking for us this time, to focus more on some facilitation. Neither of us are the best timekeepers, as is evident by the time, and and it's also challenging to hold time in these initial spaces. But if there's any discussion about that roles briefly, we should discuss it, and otherwise we can make an informal vote to do it that way.
So it sounds like what we would, what we would be voting on would be to rotate essentially at the beginning of each meeting. Folks would volunteer for that meeting to be note taker or timekeeper, and we might add more roles as becomes necessary. Any dissent or discussion?
I say we should do it that way for the first meeting, and then maybe afterwards we could choose that role at the end of the meeting going forward.
Oh, great. How do folks feel about that? So choose the role at the end for the next meeting. So you're saying for this next meeting, we will do it we'll do it at the beginning, and at the end of that meeting, we'll choose for the next meeting. Great. How does that feel to folks? Good? Can we do real thumbs or emoji thumbs? Great. That's all up, right? No down. Great. Okay. Thanks, Darlene. Yeah.
I got a question in the chat about if we could read off the part that we want everyone here for, which I think means the agreements. And I don't think that that's possible because we haven't made the agreements yet. Emily and I have some ideas of agreements, but we can't make agreements for anybody else. That's what we all have to agree. So I think we're going to table that until the beginning of the next meeting, and we can create those together. And for now, we named some things at the beginning. This space is not going to be tolerant of like bigotry or hatred. We're going to try to be grounded. We're going to try to share our responsibilities and be accountable. But beyond that, we want to make space for you all to have a say in that. And we're going to do that maybe right after some grounding in the next meeting.
And now we'd like to set up a regular meeting, which we will set up as a weekly meeting. That's what's in the proposal, a weekly meeting. For at least October. We can decide if we want to go to biweekly, if there's other work, if the other workload of information gathering increases, the committee may decide to go to biweekly. So we'd like to set up the regular meetings for October weekly. And what I want to propose, given that we are running out of time, is that Tuesday evening, 6 to 8 was the heavy favorite of this week. I don't know if that was a fluke, but it's a good starting point. So does anyone have any discussion or thoughts on that? Okay. So what I guess I'm proposing is that we meet Tuesday evenings. Yeah, Bob. Can you write in the chat?
It wouldn't interfere or conflict with select board meetings.
It does conflict with the select board meetings, yeah. And it's my understanding that nobody on the committee is also on the select board or in that in those meetings. But yes, it does. In our voting, we have to decide. That means that y'all would be, would have to choose. And my hope would that you would be choose to be here to do this work. Is that, Bob, could you write in the chat if that is a deal breaker for you or a barrier for you?
Well, I was just going to raise the issue. Can you hear me?
We can't really hear you very clearly.
No.
Conflict with the select board is more an issue as the topics being discussed that might be relevant. Yeah.
My first thought is that if it is possible for us to do these meetings on that schedule for October only, we can revisit that topic, and that Emily and I are going to be able to and have been communicating with the select board about their questions about things, and we can bring questions to them and bring information back here. The thing that we wouldn't be able to do then is for any people from here to join the public select board meeting. That doesn't mean we can't ask the select board about things. That just means that we can't, be making public decisions in the select board at the same time as our meeting. If there was something that we all needed to join that meeting about, we could set the same time and make a decision as a committee to join that meeting. And that's complicated with open meeting law, and we'd have to make a lot of technical decisions about that. But I think that if that's the only time folks can do it, my hope is that we can find a time that most folks can do it for October and revisit it as we move forward. Alter the schedule as necessary if things are coming up.
Bob, given that being the heavy favorite of the group and what Shay is saying, do you feel willing to commit to the Tuesday night meetings here, even though it's a conflict with the select board, or is that something you'd like us to further explore? You're still pretty frozen, so if you can use the chat, that'd be great. It's working well.
I'm okay with that. I just wanted to raise that issue. And so what if I stop the video? Can you hear me? No?
Can you, I'm not sure if we can really hear you. I heard you say, I'm okay with that. I
Can
want
you
to
hear now?
a little better. It's not a binary situation. Barely.
A little better?
I think if you can put it in the chat, that will really help us.
No, I just wanted to raise that as an issue so that people would understand. I'm also typing. So.
I see in the chat that there's also another comment from Drift.
Drift just said
also important to them that we try to find a way for people to be able to access the select board meetings.
What about Wednesday nights?
I can attend Tuesdays. If there's any way to avoid that, I just think it's important to have access, especially for the folks, everybody here and all your roles in the community, like to be like absent if we wanted to be on the select board to see what's going, I mean, I think it's important that we try. If not, totally, we got to do Tuesdays,
Yeah. I want to honor the time. So I think at this point, I think we might have to go to a doodle poll and strictly handle this a very administrative issue via email, via a doodle poll. Okay.
And that's going to be a poll not just about next week, but what is the regular time that we can do for the next little stretch of time? Because that's actually my understanding is that that's a requirement of this type of process, is that we have regular meetings or special meetings or emergency meetings, and we're trying to schedule the regular meetings right now. So let's deal with it by doodle poll so we can get out of here. Only 5 to 7.
Yeah, and I want to say, Bob and Drift, I really appreciate you bringing that up and being willing to really challenge us to allow for more participation. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
We'll be in touch with you all about timing and scheduling. Please write to us about questions, and we are going to adjourn. Do we need to make a motion to adjourn? Do we need to vote to adjourn?
Let's do it.
I motion that we adjourn.
I don't think you're on the committee. I don't think you can motion anything.
I unmotion to adjourn. I retract my motion to adjourn.
Committee, go ahead and adjourn us.
I motion to adjourn.
I think we need a second.
Do we?
I second that motion.
All in favor, thumbs up. Or say.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be in touch and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.